Pilot demands. Black man. Move seats. He stuns everyone when he orders a flight audit. They say air travel is one of the safest ways to get around, unless human prejudice takes the controls. High above the clouds, tensions can flare hotter than the engine's sparking drama that no one expects. On a seemingly routine flight from New York to Los Angeles, a single encounter changed everything. When the pilot singled out a black passenger and demanded he move seats, no one could predict the chain of events it would unleash. Whispers spread among wide-eyed travelers, flight attendants scrambled to restore order, and the cabin itself seemed to tremble with outrage. Little did they know one man's bold move would expose hidden secrets and ignite a battle for justice at 30,000 feet. Michael Patterson was used to being watched. As a tall black man in his mid-30s, he'd learned long ago that he drew glances, sometimes admiring, sometimes wary, in everyday life. But the tension he felt on that Thursday morning at John F. Kennedy International Airport was different. There was an undercurrent of unease in the air, perhaps a ripple in the day's energy. Michael chalked it up to his own anxiety. A big meeting awaited him in Los Angeles, and this American Airlines flight AA721, scheduled on a Boeing 737, was his only chance to get there on time. After weaving through the bustling terminal, weaving past coffee kiosks and souvenir stands, Michael finally reached the gate. The overhead screens blinked flight AA721 to Los Angeles on time. Gate agents were calling for first class and priority boarding. He looked at his ticket, reading the big, bold letters. Group 4. Michael wasn't traveling first class, he rarely did. In fact, he was in an economy seat near the front, but by some stroke of luck, it was still in the main cabin extra row. That row offered a bit more leg room, an unexpectedly welcome find when he'd booked only a day before. As he waited, he felt an itch of nervousness behind him. A line had formed. Fellow travelers wore expressions of anticipation or exhaustion, typical of an early morning flight. Some gazed at their phones, some at the overhead announcement boards, while others simply fidgeted in place. Michael stepped forward when they called Group 4, and his phone beeped as he scanned his digital boarding pass. Approaching the airplane door, he felt a surge of claustrophobia. So many times he'd traveled under tense conditions, aware that any small perceived slight or misunderstanding could escalate. Despite the era of heightened awareness about discrimination, he understood it was still out there, lurking in subtle gestures, half smiles, or even direct hostility. He stepped inside the narrow cabin, greeted by the hum of the ventilation system and the faint smell of morning coffee from flight attendants. He breathed a small sigh of relief. So far, so good. A tall, broad-shouldered flight attendant named Sasha guided him down the aisle with a professional smile. "Sir, your seat is on the left. 9A, she said politely. Michael nodded his thanks. The seat by the window next to an older woman reading a magazine was all set. She glanced up at him, nodded, and returned to her reading. For a moment, everything felt normal, an ordinary flight, until he heard a sharply hissed whisper from behind him. "That's my seat." A voice bristled with indignation. Michael froze. Another passenger, an agitated middle-aged man with a beady stare, glared at him. The seat number on the overhead bin matched Michael's ticket, though. Instinctively, Michael double-checked. Indeed, it said 9A. The man insisted again. "I've been assigned that seat. You need to move." He thrusted his boarding pass in the flight attendant's face. Sasha frowned as she compared the passes. Her eyebrows furrowed. "Sir, "Your boarding pass says 9C, she told the man gently. "This gentleman is in the right seat. Please take yours." The man's eyes narrowed at Michael, but the flight attendant guided him firmly to 9C. Though the moment ended quickly, it left Michael slightly on edge. He put on his seatbelt, wishing silently that it would be the last confrontation of the trip. He glanced around the cabin as more passengers filed in. A mother juggled a crying infant. An elderly couple discreetly clutched each other's arms. A businessman in a crisp suit typed away frenetically on his laptop. So many different stories, all converging in this small, pressurized space that would soon hurl them across the country. Little did any of them know they were about to become part of a much bigger story, one that would expose layers of prejudice and eventually topple the arrogance of the man in charge of their safety, Captain Richard Givens. As passengers settled, an announcement crackled over the intercom. "Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. This is Captain Givens speaking. We'll be taking off shortly for Los Angeles. Our flight time will be about 5 hours and 40 minutes. We're expecting clear skies along most of our route, though we may hit some turbulence over the Rockies. Please follow the instructions of our flight attendants and enjoy your flight." The pilot's voice sounded gruff, authoritative, typical enough. Michael tried not to read anything into it. He put his phone on airplane mode, then pulled out a thick folder. Inside were documents for the meeting he had scheduled in LA. A major compliance review for a new manufacturing process. Michael was a senior consultant at an engineering firm that specialized in compliance and audits. Often they worked with government agencies like the Federal Aviation Administration, FAA. He always prided himself on thoroughness and professionalism. As he was about to highlight a passage, Michael noticed Sasha coming down the aisle, carrying a worried expression. She paused at seats around him, addressing a few passengers. When she got to Michael's row, she leaned in with a forced smile. "Sir, I'm sorry, but I need to confirm your seat one more time. May I see your boarding pass?" Michael frowned slightly but handed it over. Her eyes scanned the code, matching it to the manifest on her tablet. "Yes, that's correct," she muttered. "All right, thank you." She gave him a reassuring nod, but Michael sensed a flicker of tension behind her eyes. She moved on to the next row, repeating the process. Leaning toward Michael, the older woman next to him whispered, "I think they're having an issue with the seat assignments. Some glitch in the system." She shrugged lightly, as if trying to soothe him. "Don't worry. I'm sure it's fine." Michael nodded and turned back to his folder, but the unsettled feeling remained. The flight's departure time was nearing, and the murmuring among passengers suggested that multiple seat mix-ups had occurred. After a brief delay, the flight attendants managed to seat everyone. Soon enough, the cabin door closed, and the plane began to taxi away from the gate. As the Boeing 737 sped down the runway, the engines roared. Michael, focusing on his notes, felt that familiar surge of adrenaline he always experienced during takeoff. He glanced around. The elderly woman, now closing her magazine, clutched the armrest. The man who earlier argued about seat 9A was fidgeting and mumbling under his breath. The mother in the back tried to calm her wailing baby. Everything felt heightened. Once the seatbelt sign blinked off, flight attendants rolled carts down the aisle, offering beverages. Passengers plugged in headphones or opened laptops. Michael allowed himself a small measure of relief, thinking the earlier incident was behind him. That was until he heard the flight deck door click open and caught a glimpse of Captain Richard Givens stepping out to speak with the head flight attendant. From his vantage point, Michael couldn't hear the words exchanged, but he saw the captain's face taut with annoyance. The flight attendant, a younger man named Daniel, looked apologetic, nodding vigorously. Then Givens cast a sweeping gaze across the cabin, pausing when his eyes landed on Michael. The pilot's lip tightened, and he said something to Daniel that made the flight attendant flinch. Michael tried to brush off the feeling that he was being targeted. It could have been anything. But in his gut, he felt it, that intangible friction. With each minute, the journey threatened to morph into something else entirely. It was about an hour into the flight when the seatbelt sign chimed on again. The aircraft hit a pocket of turbulence, causing soft jolts that made the drink carts rattle. Flight attendants hurried to secure loose items. Over the intercom, Captain Givens announced they were entering a rough patch, but would clear it soon. Michael turned to glance out the window, glimpsing a sea of clouds illuminated by the morning sun. He exhaled, hoping to refocus on his reading. As soon as he settled in, Sasha approached again, wearing a far more anxious expression than before. "Sir," she said, leaning down to speak discreetly, "the captain has requested that you, She lowered her voice. "He wants you to move seats." Michael's eyebrows shot up. "Me move seats?" Why, Sasha cast a quick glance around. "He's citing issues with balancing the cabin. Something about your seat being incorrectly assigned." Her voice wavered, hinting she didn't believe the explanation. "He specifically asked if you would relocate to the back." Michael's heart pounded. "Did the captain specifically name me?" Her eyes darted away, confirming his suspicion. "He, singled out a few passengers. You're included." Yet the uneasy flush on her face suggested something deeper. She clearly found the order uncomfortable. Michael inhaled slowly, trying to remain calm. "This seat was correct on my boarding pass, which you yourself confirmed. If there was a legitimate reason, I'd be happy to move. But is there balancing the cabin usually means distributing weight among the plane's sections? There are many ways to do that. Why specifically me and not others?" Sasha swallowed. "I'm not entirely sure," she said. Carefully, "Would you mind if I asked you to stay put for a moment while I—" But before she could finish, another flight attendant, Daniel, touched her shoulder. He looked troubled. "We have to comply with the captain," he murmured. "We don't have a choice." Michael felt a wave of tension spread among nearby passengers who overheard fragments of the conversation. The older woman next to him looked outraged, but stayed silent. Others in the row across the aisle watched intently. "No," Michael said firmly, addressing the attendants, but keeping his voice calm. "I'm not moving unless there's a valid safety reason, and from what I understand about flight operations, and I do have some knowledge, there doesn't seem to be one." Daniel's cheeks reddened. "Sir, if the captain—" Michael cut him off. "I'm not causing any disturbance. I paid for my seat. I'm seated in the correct seat. If the captain has a concern, he can come speak to me himself. Otherwise, I remain right here." Sasha looked both relieved and terrified, as though she wanted to say, "Thank you for standing your ground, and, oh God, you're going to get us in trouble at the same time." The tension lingered in the air as the plane lurched again in turbulence. What Michael didn't know was that behind the closed cockpit door, Captain Givens was seething, and he was the type of man who did not like his authority questioned. About 20 minutes later, the turbulence subsided. Passengers glanced at each other, whispering about what they'd witnessed. Michael overheard snippets. "I can't believe they'd ask him to move. Is it a race thing or just a glitch? Captain's got a track record, I heard from a friend." At that last snippet, Michael perked his ears, a track record of what he turned to see a petite, bespectacled woman a row behind him. She was scrolling through her phone, likely on an offline article she'd saved or something, but she quickly stuffed it away when she saw him looking. Suddenly, the intercom crackled again with the pilot's gruff tone filling the cabin. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are adjusting our flight path due to some unexpected weather conditions. We ask for your patience. Also, if the flight attendants approach you with instructions regarding seat assignments, please cooperate immediately. This is a matter of safety and security." An uneasy murmur coursed through the cabin. Sasha Daniel and a third flight attendant made their way down the aisle once again, this time systematically. Each time they stopped, they seemed to consult a list. A few passengers were asked to move, while others were left alone. The commotion escalated, though, when they reached row 9 once more. Michael looked up in disbelief as Daniel cleared his throat. "Sir, I have to insist this time," he said, carefully avoiding direct eye contact. "The captain's orders stand. You must move to seat 27B at the back of the plane." Michael remained composed. "All right," he said. "Since this is so important, I'd like to speak to the captain directly. Could you kindly ask him to come here, because I have some questions about this so-called safety protocol. I've worked with the FAA before, and I'm quite familiar with balancing procedures." He produced his business card. Michael Patterson, Senior Compliance Consultant, Patterson & Cole Associates. Daniel's eyes widened. I'll relay that message," Daniel said nervously. With that, he scurried back to the front. It was another 10 minutes before anything happened. By then, the mother's baby had calmed. The seatbelt sign was off, and the flight attendants had served a round of beverages to the rest of the cabin. Michael sipped ginger ale, mind churning with possibilities. Was this truly about some flight manifest error? Or was it prejudice masked as procedure? Michael had been on countless flights and had occasionally encountered microaggressions like suspicious glances or condescending remarks from staff, but never to this level. He remembered overhearing stories of discriminatory behavior among certain airline employees, but had never witnessed it so blatantly from a pilot. The entire situation felt off. Then the cockpit door swung open. Captain Richard Givens stepped out. Shoulders squared, expression steeled. He was in his late 40s or early 50s with neatly trimmed salt and pepper hair. His uniform was immaculate gold stripes on his cuffs, reflecting the overhead light. Silence rippled across the surrounding rows as he strode toward Michael with an air of unshakable authority. When Givens stopped by Michael's seat, he pressed his lips into a thin line. "I understand you've asked to speak with me." His tone was measured, yet condescending. Close up, Michael could see a sternness, but also something else, like he harbored an old grudge, though they'd never met before. Michael nodded calmly. "I'd like an explanation for why I'm being asked to move. I was told it's for weight distribution, but no one has provided clear evidence this is necessary or standard. And considering I'm not the only passenger in this row, I'm curious why you singled me out." Captain Givens took a moment to measure his words. "We have limited time to keep this flight on schedule, Mr. Patterson." He began, glancing at Michael's ID card, still in hand. "I don't have to explain every operational decision I make to a passenger. If I say it's for safety, it's for safety." Michael resisted the urge to bristle. "I respect safety procedures, Captain. But I happen to be quite knowledgeable about FAA regulations. If you're referencing weight and balance typically, that's addressed before takeoff. If there was a last-minute change, the ground crew or flight attendants would do reseating systematically. This seems arbitrary." Givens's face darkened. "You're not a pilot," he scoffed. "Nor are you in command of this aircraft. So do as you're told, or what?" Michael asked softly. He kept his posture relaxed, but his eyes locked on Givens. "Are you going to land the plane and force me off." The pilot stared, fists clenched. Passengers nearby gasped or watched with bated breath. It was rare and risky for a passenger to speak so confidently to the pilot, but Michael had a calm about him, a composure that suggested he wasn't bluffing. "You do realize," Michael continued, voice unwavering, "that if you remove me without valid cause, I can and will file a formal complaint with the FA. Discrimination is a serious matter. A pilot must have a legitimate safety concern, not just personal preference to move a passenger." Givens's jaw tightened. It seemed like he was about to threaten some form of reprisal when Sasha, who'd been watching from a few seats away, intervened. "Captain, I'm sorry to interrupt," she said, "but we need you up front. ATC's on the radio about the reroute." Captain Givens inhaled sharply, exhaled and glowered at Michael. "This isn't over," he muttered. Then he turned on his heel and stormed back to the cockpit, leaving an electric charge in the air that crackled with tension. For the next hour, the flight soared in relative calm, but the atmosphere in row 9 was anything but. Passengers whispered amongst themselves, exchanging rumors about the pilot's behavior. Some recalled hearing Captain Givens had been reprimanded once for an unprofessional outburst. Another passenger said they read an article about the airline's struggles with diversity training. The older woman next to Michael introduced herself as Linda, offering a supportive pat on the shoulder and praising his composure. "Thank you, Linda," Michael said quietly. "I just hope there's no more trouble." But trouble was brewing. Every so often, Daniel or Sasha would pass by with anxious expressions. They'd linger near Michael's row, almost as if guarding him or anticipating the next confrontation. The tension escalated when the seatbelt sign came on again, and the plane dipped slightly, as if hitting a downdraft. Then a surprising voice came from behind. "Excuse me, are you Michael Patterson?" The bespectacled woman from earlier peered over her seat. She seemed shy, but determined. "I overheard your conversation with the pilot. Did you say you work in aviation compliance?" Michael nodded, noticing a small swirl of curiosity in her eyes. "Yes, I'm a consultant. My firm works with various industries, but we do a lot with FAA regulations." She extended a cautious hand. "I'm Nina Carter. I'm actually a journalist focusing on civil rights in corporate America. And I have heard stories about Captain Givens. Rumors of repeated complaints, mostly from minority passengers, who claim he treated them differently. I was going to investigate further, but everything was hush-hush." Michael's brow furrowed. "I've heard nothing specific about him personally, but I'm not surprised if he's been reported. He seems to have a chip on his shoulder about something." Nina nodded gravely. "Listen, I've seen enough to suspect discrimination. If you plan to escalate this, I'd be willing to help, maybe connect you with sources." Michael gave a tentative smile. "Let's see how the rest of this flight unfolds. I might need your help if it goes badly." No sooner had he said those words than the plane lurched again, this time more violently. The lights flickered momentarily, and a collective gasp rippled through the cabin. Overhead bins rattled, and a few passengers whimpered in alarm. The seatbelt sign flashed insistently. Michael and Nina exchanged concerned looks as a voice came on the intercom. "Passengers, this is your captain," Givens said, sounding tense. "We're experiencing unexpected turbulence, so please remain in your seats with seatbelts fastened." There was a pause, then he added in a clipped tone, "And do not disregard any instructions from the cockpit, or we will be forced to take appropriate measures for everyone's safety." The pointed edge of that warning was not lost on anyone, least of all Michael. The turbulence grew worse, and the flight attendants quickly secured the cabin. Sasha went down the aisle, making sure tray tables were up, seatbelts were locked. She paused by Michael, offering a discreet apology. "I'm so sorry about earlier," she whispered. "He's been difficult with the crew, too." Before Michael could respond, the plane jerked edgeways as though caught in a violent wind shear. A few screams erupted and drinks spilled onto laps. Sasha clung to a seatback to keep from stumbling. It was chaos for a few minutes. The cabin lights flickered on and off, overhead compartments banged incessantly, and that unsettling feeling of freefall made hearts hammer. Michael braced himself, not only physically, but mentally. He wondered if Givens had changed course to deliberately trap the flight in a rougher patch, but that seemed unlikely. No pilot would endanger everyone, just out of spite. Still, the air of unease was undeniable. Eventually, the turbulence subsided into a series of smaller bumps. People breathed shaky sighs of relief. A few children cried. Nervous chatter filled the aisles as flight attendants comforted passengers. It was then that Michael noticed Captain Givens's voice once again on the intercom. "Apologies for the disturbance, folks. We've skirted around most of this front. We'll try to make up time and land in LAX without further issues." Michael stared at the overhead panel, his mind awash with thoughts. He had a strong suspicion that Givens was lashing out, letting his bitterness seep into decisions from the cockpit. That in turn made Michael worry about the actual safety of the flight. After all, if the pilot's judgment was clouded by prejudice or anger, how secure were they truly? The sense of unrest spread beyond row 9. Passengers who had witnessed or heard about the confrontation began voicing solidarity or concern. Whispers traveled from first class to economy about how the pilot had targeted one man because of his race. A middle-aged couple from 3 rows down leaned over to Michael when he walked to the restroom. "We've got your back," they murmured conspiratorially. Another passenger, young athlete wearing headphones, gave Michael a nod and a thumbs up as he passed. It was strange, almost surreal, how quickly alliances formed in the compressed environment of an airplane cabin. When Michael returned to his seat, Nina told him in a hushed tone that she'd talked to at least half a dozen passengers who were outraged by Givens' behavior. Some were even emailing or texting the airline's customer service, though it would likely queue until after they landed. The general sentiment was that if the pilot tried to force Michael out of his seat again, they wouldn't stand for it. But as the plane cruised at altitude, another question arose in Michael's mind. Did Captain Givens have enough self-awareness to realize the predicament he was putting himself in? Or was he too consumed by arrogance? Michael also worried about the flight attendants, Sasha and Daniel, who were caught in the middle of a power struggle. They had to follow orders, but their loyalty seemed divided. Almost halfway through the flight, the seatbelt sign flickered off. People stretched, used the restroom, or rummaged through overhead bins. Sasha reappeared by Michael's row, her face ashen. "Sir," she whispered, "the captain insists you move now." Michael clenched his jaw. This again. We're in the middle of the flight. The rough air is behind us. Why is he pushing this? Sasha bit her lip. He says your presence in this seat is a disturbance to operational procedures. He claims you refused his direct instruction, so he's requesting you move as a matter of authority rather than weight balance now. Authority, Michael echoed, eyes narrowing. Before Sasha could respond, Captain Givens's voice boomed over the intercom, loud and clear, so everyone could hear. "Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for the inconvenience, but I must request passenger Michael Patterson in row 9 to relocate to the back of the aircraft. This is a matter of cockpit authority. If he refuses to comply, we will be forced to divert and remove him from the flight." A collective gasp and an eruption of chatter followed. People craned their necks to catch sight of Michael. The sense of drama was thick enough to cut with a knife. Michael felt a flush of anger surge in his chest. The pilot had just singled him out by name over the PA system, threatened to divert the flight and humiliate him publicly. This was beyond a mere seat relocation. This was a direct, targeted attack. Rising from his seat, Michael made a decision. "Everyone listen," he called out, turning in the aisle so nearby Rose could hear him. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried a certain gravity. "I'm being asked to move seats with no legitimate safety reason. I'm not interfering with the flight. I'm not breaking any rules. This is discrimination, pure and simple." The chatter escalated as some passengers nodded vigorously and voiced their agreement. A few clapped in support. Others looked on with alarm, worried about the ramifications. Sasha seemed on the verge of tears, caught in the crossfire. Nina stood up behind him, phone in hand. "I'm recording this," she announced. "If the captain insists on throwing Michael Patterson off the flight, we have multiple witnesses ready to testify. This is harassment and it's unacceptable." A wave of "hear, hear" and outraged comments spread down the rows. The tension was undeniable. For a moment, Michael feared the pilot might do something reckless, like forcibly land at the nearest airport or call security. But the plane remained at cruising altitude, on course for LAX. Inside the cockpit, Captain Givens sat in his seat, face flushed with anger. His first officer, a mild-mannered man named Greg Turner, repeatedly glanced at him. Turner cleared his throat. "Captain, maybe we should just let this go." Diverting the flight over a seat dispute, especially if the passenger claims discrimination could cause major repercussions. Givens shot Turner a glare. "You're not in command, Turner. I am. That passenger is challenging my authority, and if we give in, we lose respect. The airline can't expect us to run a flight with insubordination in the cabin." Turner swallowed. He'd flown with Givens before and knew the man's temper. But this was extreme. "Sir, with all due respect, we risk a PR nightmare. The passengers seem on his side, and from a safety standpoint, we aren't threatened. Why escalate it?" Givens clenched his jaw, staring at the instrument panel. "Because I said so." He refused to articulate further, but the subtext was clear. Givens felt personally affronted and was willing to weaponize his position. He keyed the intercom again. "Flight attendants, get Patterson to move now, or I divert. You have 5 minutes." The cabin filled with a tense hush as Sasha Daniel and the third attendant hurried to Michael. Sasha swallowed hard, voice trembling. "He just gave us 5 minutes to ensure you comply. Otherwise, we land somewhere else." Michael turned to the crowd. "Is everyone willing to put up with a diversion that'll delay our arrival by hours? People might miss connections." "I don't want to inconvenience anyone, but it's not your fault," someone shouted from a few rows away. "He's the one being unreasonable." A wave of agreement spread. Nina, still filming, stepped closer. "We stand with you," she said. "If you move under threat, he gets his way. It sets a bad precedent." Michael looked at the worried faces, people who had meetings, vacations, family to see. He battled an inner conflict. Should he just comply and avoid dragging innocent bystanders into a fiasco? Or should he stand up for what was right, exposing the pilot's discriminatory behavior? Then a voice from the back piped up. "No one should have to give in to racism." It was a young black man, maybe in his 20s, who had been quietly watching. He stood, raising a fist in solidarity. "I've had enough of it in my own life. Don't back down." Others clapped. The cabin swelled with a sense of unity, an unexpected wave of compassion and moral outrage. Michael felt emboldened. "All right," he said. "I'm staying put." The plane cruised on the tension almost unbearable. Minutes ticked by. Passengers whispered about whether the pilot would actually divert. Where would they land? Denver, Las Vegas, Phoenix. The cost and chaos of a diversion would be immense, not to mention the news headlines that would follow. Sure enough, after 5 minutes, Captain Givens's voice cut through the cabin's hush. "We are diverting to Albuquerque International Sunport. Prepare for an unscheduled landing." A collective cry of dismay rippled. People groaned, cursed, or looked at Michael with a mix of sympathy and frustration. Michael himself felt ill. They were going to land in New Mexico, hours away from LA, just because of one man's ego. But fate had another plan. Not 10 seconds after Givens' announcement, a different voice crackled through the intercom. This time from air traffic control. It was faint but audible to the passengers, as Givens had inadvertently left the channel open. "American 721, be advised, strong storm activity has closed Albuquerque for the next 2 hours. You are instructed to hold or divert to an alternate." Michael and the passengers sat in stunned silence, overhearing the exchange. They could hear Givens cursing under his breath, evidently forgetting the cockpit speaker was still on. Then the frequency cut out, presumably, as Givens switched off the public address feed. For a long moment, the plane continued on course, presumably, while the cockpit decided their next move. Diverting was no longer a straightforward option. Meanwhile, the cabin buzzed with a mixture of hope and anxiety. 10 minutes later, Captain Givens reappeared in the cabin looking livid. He marched straight to Michael's seat. Daniel and Sasha stood off to the side, visibly nervous. "We can't land at Albuquerque," Givens hissed, keeping his voice low but pointed. "But I swear, if you don't move to the back, I'll find another airport, even if it means delaying hundreds of people." Michael felt a surge of frustration. "Captain, do you hear yourself? Listen to the passengers. They don't want this. You're punishing everyone over a seat that's rightfully mine." Givens' eyes blazed. "I don't take orders from you. You do what I say on my aircraft." Michael's temper flared, but he managed to speak evenly. "Legally, you do have command of the aircraft. But you also have a legal responsibility not to violate anti-discrimination laws or endanger passengers over personal grudges. If you really want to push this, then let's push it all the way. I'm prepared to file with the FAA, the Department of Transportation, and involve lawyers, whatever it takes." Around them, passengers had gone silent, listening intently. Many recorded the confrontation on their phones. Givens, seeing the cameras, sputtered, "Turn those off, no recording." Several passengers merely kept recording, defying him. Nina stepped forward. "We have every right to record an incident of potential civil rights violations, Captain." His nostrils flared. For a moment it looked like Givens might physically lash out. Then Daniel gently touched his shoulder. "Sir, please let's go back to the cockpit. We're in open skies. We need you to focus." Givens glared at Daniel, then at Michael before stomping back to the flight deck, leaving a hushed terror in his wake. The plane continued westward, its passengers bracing for potential diversion. Tension roiled in the cabin like an untamed storm. Michael's heart, pounding, wondered if the pilot might indeed jeopardize the entire flight just to get his way. He prayed that cooler heads would prevail. Then something unusual happened. Sasha quietly approached row 9, crouched down beside Michael, and whispered, "Listen, There might be a way to escalate this from inside. I noticed your business card. You said you work with the FAA sometimes. Our airline's own internal policies also require us to report incidents like this. Could you request a safety audit or something? Sometimes that triggers immediate oversight. Michael's eyes flickered with realization. A flight audit, he murmured. He explained in a low voice, I have enough contacts in the FAA to request an in-flight safety check if there's evidence the pilot is compromising passenger safety. If enough passengers corroborate that the pilot is acting irrationally or in a discriminatory manner, it could justify an urgent review. Nina listened intently. Would that cause more trouble? It might, Michael said, but it also might rein him in. Because if the FAA or the airline's corporate headquarters starts monitoring him mid-flight, he'll have to behave. Sasha nodded fervently. Please, he's not listening to his own crew. We're scared he'll do something reckless out of anger. With that seed planted, Michael decided to act. He signaled to Nina and a few other passengers who had shown support. They quickly gathered testimonials of what had transpired, compiling videos and statements. Then, using the airplane's Wi-Fi, though spotty and slow, they prepared a complaint. Nina wrote a concise email, while Michael appended relevant flight regulations. They addressed it to multiple recipients, the FAA's hotline, the airline's customer service director, and even the Department of Transportation's enforcement office. Subject: urgent. Potential: discriminatory. And unsafe behavior. By Captain of Flight AA721. Read the subject line. They attached multiple passenger statements, including Sasha's and Daniel's confidential notes. Then they pressed send, hoping the spotty in-flight Wi-Fi would allow it to go through. Miraculously, the email seemed to depart their outbox. Nina's phone screen indicated it had been sent. Now came the waiting game. What would happen? In many cases, an email mid-flight might go unnoticed for hours. But if the airline's communications staff or the FAA's emergency channels were manned, a real-time alert could filter through. At the very least, it might document events for a follow-up investigation. In the cabin, the tension subsided slightly, as passengers realized they might have just taken a powerful step to safeguard themselves. Small clusters of travelers discussed the next moves others shared. Snacks, and some offered quiet words of comfort to each other. The seatbelt sign flashed on once more, but this time it wasn't due to turbulence. Captain Givens was making an abrupt descent, presumably to dodge some weather or possibly line up for another potential diversion. People clutched their armrests, bracing for the unknown. About half an hour later, as the plane flew over the vast desert expanse of Arizona, Sasha suddenly approached with fresh urgency. Michael, she whispered, the cockpit, just got a direct message from operations. The pilot looked furious, so I'm guessing it's about your complaint. Michael's pulse quickened. They responded. She nodded. I didn't see the details, but his face. He's livid. I think they might be telling him to stand down. Down the aisle, Daniel was quietly nodding at Michael, giving a tiny thumbs up. The sense of approaching resolution spread among those paying attention. But would Givens obey an order from headquarters, or would he defy it in a last-ditch stand? In a swift, dramatic flourish, Givens emerged from the cockpit once again. This time, his face was contorted in a mix of rage and resentment. He marched up to Michael, ignoring the hush that fell over the entire cabin. "You went behind my back," he seethed, sending complaints mid-flight like I'm some rookie in training. "I've been a pilot for 20 years, and no passenger disrespects me like this." Several camera phones recorded every word. Michael kept his voice low and steady. "I didn't do this to disrespect you, Captain. I did it for everyone's safety, and for my rights as a passenger." Givens's gaze swept the cabin, lingering on the phones aimed at him. For a moment he looked like a cornered animal. Then he jabbed a finger at Michael. "You're done. I'm diverting to Phoenix Sky Harbor. You will be taken off the plane, and we'll continue to LA without you." A chorus of protests erupted. Passengers stood in solidarity, some proclaiming they'd also deplane in Phoenix if Michael was removed. The older woman, Linda, now emboldened, shouted, "This is outrageous. We'll all file complaints." Nina stepped forward, brandishing her phone. "Captain Givens, the entire world is going to see this if you remove Michael without cause. You've already had direct instructions from your headquarters, haven't you?" A flicker of uncertainty crossed his face. He hesitated, checking the watch on his wrist as though weighing the time cost. Then he spat out, "Fine. Stay in your seat and we'll land at LAX on time. But this insubordination won't be forgotten." Just when it seemed the situation couldn't get any more tumultuous, an alarm blared from the cockpit. Passengers only heard a distant klaxon, but Givens stiffened. Without another word, he dashed back up front. The suddenness sent a ripple of fear through the cabin. Michael exchanged worried glances with Nina and Sasha. "What now?" he asked in a hush. Sasha frowned. "I'm not sure. Could be a mechanical issue or a system malfunction. We've had no warnings so far, though." The plane banked slightly, altering its course, and an intercom announcement from the first officer came on. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is First Officer Greg Turner. We have a minor mechanical indicator light that we're evaluating. It's likely nothing serious, but as a precaution, we'll begin our initial descent toward Los Angeles. Please remain in your seats with seatbelts fastened." A sigh of relief mingled with fresh anxiety. At least they were heading to LAX, presumably. The mechanical issue, however, added another layer of tension. Was it truly minor? The flight attendants prepared the cabin for landing earlier than expected. Trays were collected, seats returned to upright positions. The murmuring among passengers was frantic. Would they actually land safely in Los Angeles, or would they face a forced landing somewhere else? Michael noticed the plane trembling slightly more than usual. Perhaps it was normal turbulence, or perhaps it was related to the mechanical fault. Whatever it was, it made everyone uneasy. Nina squeezed the armrest, her phone camera still rolling intermittently. Sasha passed by one more time, giving Michael a quick nod. "Hang in there," she whispered. Then, turning to address the entire row, her professional voice returned. "We'll be on the ground soon." As they neared Los Angeles, the usual ear-popping descent caused babies to cry and passengers to yawn to equalize pressure. The plane dipped and swayed a bit, but the skyline eventually came into view, the sprawling city and further beyond the glistening Pacific. It was nearing early afternoon, later than scheduled, but not drastically so. Michael tried to steady his breathing. This had been one of the most stressful flights of his life. He still had a major business meeting to attend, but overshadowing that was the question of what consequences Captain Givens would face. Would the airline side with the pilot, or would they acknowledge Michael's complaint? He glanced around the cabin at all the supportive faces. At least he knew he wasn't alone. He also had Nina's recordings, multiple witness statements, and the knowledge that Sasha and Daniel might testify about how unprofessional Givens had been. When the aircraft finally touched down on the runway at LAX, a wave of relief swept the cabin. Applause and cheers erupted, the usual triumphant sign of a safe landing, but this time laced with the emotional release of a harrowing journey. As the plane taxied to the gate, an awkward hush returned. Would Givens try to have Michael arrested upon arrival? Would security swarm the jet bridge? No one knew. People waited seatbelts, still fastened phones in hand. The seatbelt sign turned off, and the flight attendants moved to open the doors. Sasha gave Michael a meaningful look, then made an announcement. "On behalf of American Airlines, we apologize for any inconvenience. We've arrived at Gate 52B. Please remain seated until it's your turn to deplane." Michael saw the cockpit door open, revealing Givens. He looked haggard, but still wore a scowl. Without addressing the passengers, he marched out first, likely heading straight to a supervisor or airline manager. Next, the first officer stepped out, gave a quick nod to the cabin almost apologetically, and disappeared. Once the jet bridge was attached, passengers began filing out. Michael and Nina lingered to be near the end, not wanting to spark any confrontation in the aisle. Sasha quietly whispered, "Good luck," as they exited. When they stepped into the gate area, they were met by two uniformed airline officials and a pair of transportation security officers. Michael tensed. Nina kept her phone recording discreetly, but the lead official, her name tag read Elaine Marshall. Station manager immediately spoke up in a calm, professional tone. "Mr. Patterson, Ms. Carter and all passengers involved, please come with me. We need to hear your statements. We've received multiple alerts about the incident on board." Givens stood off to the side, arms folded, jaw clenched. When Elaine glanced at him, she said, "Captain, we'll speak shortly in a separate room." He tried to interject, but she silenced him with a raised hand. "We've been instructed by corporate to handle this matter with utmost priority. Please wait for us in the manager's office." In a nearby conference room, about a dozen passengers, Michael, Nina, Linda, the young man who raised his fist, and a few others gave their accounts. Sasha and Daniel were there too, providing a crew perspective. Michael was struck by how consistent everyone's stories were. Givens had harassed Michael repeatedly, demanded he move seats without legitimate cause, threatened a diversion, singled Michael out over the intercom, and created an intimidating environment. Elaine Marshall and a regional airline representative jotted down notes, clearly alarmed. Occasionally, they asked clarifying questions. Nina provided video clips. Another passenger offered more footage from a different angle. When they finished, Elaine sighed, looking troubled. "I'm very sorry. This is absolutely not the standard of service or professional conduct we expect from our pilots. We appreciate all of you for coming forward. We'll be launching a thorough investigation." Michael felt a wave of relief. For the first time since the seat dispute began, it seemed the airline was taking things seriously. Elaine collected everyone's contact information, promising updates. She also handed out travel vouchers to each passenger as a gesture of apology, though the group seemed far more concerned about justice than freebies. Once the statements were taken, Michael was asked to remain a bit longer. Elaine explained that the captain was being interviewed separately, and the airline wanted to confirm a few details before officially concluding. Nina offered to stay with him, but Michael urged her to get going if she had to. She insisted on waiting. She wanted the whole story. Linda also stayed out of solidarity. An hour later, Elaine emerged looking flustered. "Captain Givens is... Well, let's just say we'll be relieving him of flight duties pending investigation. For your own information, Mr. Patterson, I suspect he may face disciplinary action. Thank you for your patience." Michael nodded. "I appreciate that. I don't want to see anyone lose their livelihood, but he can't be allowed to treat passengers that way." Elaine agreed. "I understand. The best we can do now is follow the proper protocols. Please accept the airline's sincerest apologies. We'll be in touch soon." Over the next few days, the story broke in the media. Nina, with Michael's permission, wrote an article detailing the events aboard flight AA721. Her piece went viral, accompanied by cell phone videos showing Captain Given's behavior. Public outrage was swift. Civil rights groups voiced support for Michael, urging the airline to address discrimination seriously. Within a week, an FAA inquiry was launched, partly due to Michael's mid-flight complaint. They interviewed flight attendants, the first officer, and passengers. They examined flight data to see if any operational decisions were compromised by the pilot's hostility. As details emerged that Captain Givens had faced multiple prior complaints, it became clear that the airline had overlooked red flags. Meanwhile, Michael tried to return to normal life, focusing on his consulting job. The meeting in LA had gone well, though overshadowed by the drama. Yet calls from journalists and lawyers flooded in, wanting to know if he'd sue the airline. Michael held off, waiting to see how the airline would respond internally. 2 months later, Michael received a letter from American Airlines. Inside, he found a formal apology and an update on the disciplinary measures taken against Captain Richard Givens. The airline wrote, after a thorough review, including passenger statements, flight data, and compliance with federal regulations, we have determined that Captain Givens' actions constituted a serious breach of our professional and ethical standards. Effective immediately, Captain Givens is dismissed from his position with American Airlines. Furthermore, we are enacting reforms to ensure such incidents never occur again. Michael felt a mix of relief and sadness. Relief because justice was served. Sadness because it had come to this, a man's career ended due to his inability to check his prejudice. Yet if Givens refused to learn and persisted in mistreating passengers, there was little choice. FAA findings later concluded Givens had endangered the flight by considering a diversion for non-operational reasons. The pilot was stripped of his FAA license for a year, a severe penalty in the aviation world. It was the karmic payback many believed he deserved, though it carried a sense of moral weight, one man's downfall caused by his bigotry and arrogance. In the aftermath, Michael found himself unexpectedly thrust into the spotlight as an advocate for equality in the skies. He collaborated with Nina on follow-up articles, even giving a few interviews discussing the reforms needed in aviation. Sasha and Daniel also spoke up, praising the passengers who had united against discrimination. The public reaction was overwhelming. Many travelers shared their own stories of unfair treatment. The airline, spurred by the negative press, introduced new diversity training for all employees and updated protocols to ensure seat disputes would be handled transparently with no room for personal bias. They publicly thanked Michael Patterson for bringing the issue to their attention and promised to do better. As for Michael, he continued his career as a compliance consultant, but with a renewed sense of purpose. He realized the power of standing up for what was right, even in the confined space of an airplane cabin. A single voice, amplified by solidarity, had exposed wrongdoing and forced a powerful institution to change. It was a testament to how swiftly justice could come when people refused to remain silent. Justice caught up with Captain Givens in an extraordinary twist of fate, reminding us all that arrogance and prejudice can never truly fly high without consequence. Michael Patterson's steadfast stand for his rights resonated far beyond that Boeing 737, inspiring fellow passengers, crew members, and eventually an entire airline to acknowledge their responsibility. From the heart-stopping turbulence at 30,000 feet to the thunderous aftermath on the ground, this real-life drama proves that courage, unity, and compassion will always triumph over discrimination. If you found this story gripping, enlightening, or both, Please remember to like this video, share it with friends who appreciate a tale of justice, and subscribe to our channel for more powerful narratives. Your support helps us continue uncovering and sharing stories that resonate deeply and ignite change. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next video.